Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here. Honored.
We really appreciate your time. Um, to start the conversation, we have known about global warming for my entire lifetime. I've always heard about it. It's always been talked, but it really seems to be an abstract concept that's hard for people to grasp. Why is that?
There's a lot of reasons for that, and you're quite right that it's been in the public sphere for 45, 50 years in the sense of media, articles, magazines, TV, etc. And it started out from scientists, of course, and what they knew 50 years ago was adequate to the task at hand. We knew enough then to know what to do and what not to do. And what they did is use the word future existential threat. In other words, just posed a future existential threat to humanity. And threat implies fear, or, and so that was picked up in the 70s, really in the Earth Day movement as it started, which we're celebrating this week. But, and the activists then added blame and shame and and guilt to that. In other words, they started pointing fingers, at companies, Exxon, etc., oil companies, car companies, companies that were profligate in their waste and damage to the environment and the oceans, etc. And so now you had fear, threat, blame, guilt, shame, and basically stir well. And what you have is a guaranteed a narrative that will turn most people off. No, it's just not, it just isn't how the brain responds, and we don't respond to that. We actually if we hear it once, it's interesting. Twice is, not as interesting. The 10th time, the 20th time, you just shut down from that type of dialogue. And I think one of the things that's really prevented meaningful action with respect to the global climate crisis, which is it's a huge threat. I mean, it is the largest threat to humanity and civilization that's ever occurred, is that the language that the climate movement in the broadest sense of the word uses to this day is actually an othering language. And that is to say, it's made it other. And you can see that or hear that or read it when we talk about fighting climate change or tackling climate change or tackling change, as if this was a war or a sport, And so basically, there's two things wrong with that. One is climate isn't elsewhere. It is everywhere. It's in the room you're in. It was trapped by the doors, but I'm just saying it came in that way. It is inextricable from the biosphere. Like somehow the gas is separate from Earth. That's what atmosphere is, a gas. Well, how about us? We breathe in, we breathe out oxygen, CO2, we exhale, and so forth, I mean, and yet we're material, that is to say, we're both, and we're one entity. We're called a human being, Homo sapiens. And so the Earth is the same. It's inextricable from the plants and animals and, and tundra and forests and sloughs and wetlands and oceans. The atmosphere you can't separate it. So the idea that there's a climate out there somewhere that we could fight, tackle, and combat is laughable. Second, the idea that we should fight change. That's a curious one, because the climate is meant to change. Is what it does. It changes every nanosecond. If it didn't change, we wouldn't have, glaciers and rivers and salmon and blueberries and grizzlies and all the things that make, this world, this Earth so extraordinary, is because it tilts. And you have oceans and you have jet streams and you have this very, very complex self-organizing system, where the weather changes, every second. And so fighting change is kind of another really, you want to fighting change? What we want to address is not climate, because it cannot make a mistake. It just is. It's an artifact of what we do down here. So what we need to address is us. is human activity, not fighting climate. And so that's a more introspective, more self-reflective, more like, way of looking at it, as opposed to externalizing it and othering it. Because othering it is what we do. We think nature is separate. It's separate. We're different. We're humans, but we're not nature. No, we're not. We are nature. Everything is nature. And so, but othering language is the mindset that caused the problem. We thought we could spew gases in the atmosphere. We didn't know at first, but we certainly do know now. We thought we could put waste into the oceans. We thought we could destroy wetlands. We thought we could, we've othered nature to extract from it what we want, or in many cases to put what we don't want into nature. And that's degeneration. So we have been really actively degenerating the earth for a long time, but certainly since the Industrial Revolution in a very accelerated way. And so regeneration is really about saying, that road doesn't go much further. That's like, we can see the end of that road. That's what all the headlines and warnings are about, which is this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, and it can't happen too much more. And so regeneration is like a 180, which is saying we need to go the other way. And there has always been this argument that if we address these things, somehow we'll be hurt economically, that, business has to keep the economy going, but we'll try to do something over here with, the environment. And what regeneration shows in very clearly is we can create a GDP out of creating more life on Earth instead of taking life. And that's the difference. And it's a 180. And when you look at the world that way, when you look at what you do, when you look at your actions, when you look at what you make, the services, the products, and how we relate to each other, on socially, economically, and so forth, then we see it's a very different lens, a way of looking at climate for sure. And ending the climate crisis in one generation simply was a research project that came out of prior book Drawdown, but to see if that was true, if that was possible. It's not like aspirational. It is aspirational, but it wasn't just aspirational. We have 7,262 citations in the book. And so I feel like I love science. I'm not a scientist. I have profound respect for it. And so that book rests on the floor of science, but the thing that changes people is narratives and stories, not facts.
Right. And that's one thing that really impressed me about your book was how you explored how interconnected everything is. You talked about how big of a problem poverty and social justice issues are related and interconnected completely. They're inseparable. Would you talk a little bit about how poverty and social justice issues are connected with global warming?
Sure. I mean, what has been said recently, there's like kind of people awakened to the fact that the causes of global warming and even some of the cures have a disproportionate negative impact upon communities of color, or people who are downwind, or people who live in low-lying areas, and so forth. So there's this term climate justice. Okay, fair enough. What we don't see is that injustice is the cause of global warming. No, it's the root cause, as opposed to, oh, by the way, we should make sure we don't, harm people over here, because that's the voice of privileged people, colonial people, talking about others. We're still othering. And so the thing about future existential threat, that term that was originally put forth, and still is, by the way, is it came from science. It came to people who are privileged, that was, it really did. And it sounded like, it does sound like, well, we should do something, and I should change my home, the house, I should drive a Tesla, all that kind of stuff. But if we're going to address this and succeed, we have to address current existential threat, because the bulk of humanity wakes up every morning concerned about that. Their children, food security, warmth, clothing, books, jobs, income. That's what they wake up. 4.5 billion people in the world live in impoverished conditions, out of the 7.8, And so if the climate movement isn't embracing all of us, and you said interconnected, that is because our fate is all connected. It's not, we can't separate our fates on this earth from each other, like, we're going to do well up here, but sorry about that down there. So like, no, it's one earth. And I like that you commented on that, because when I wrote the book in the introduction, I easily could have said, it's all connected, which is true and so trite. It's like, thank you for sharing, And so what I did is in the book is make connections, that like, who knew? And like, this goes to that, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, And so that the reader could come to that conclusion themselves if they wished, which is, wow, it's all connected. So most of the climate literature, Chris, is really tacitly, there's a subtext, and the subtext is, I know you don't, listen up. And what I try to do is create the conditions for people to change their mind, because I cannot change other people's minds. I can't. I work every day on changing my own mind, and it's hard, let me tell you. And so what I try to do when I write is create the openness and spaciousness for people to make up their own mind, to make their own decisions, to make their own, to create their own insights and so forth, as opposed to, well, he's an expert, I know nothing, let's see what he says, or we say. And I think that's really important in terms of how we connect to each other. And if we try to connect to each other by fear, threat, and doom and gloom, and, we're screwed if we don't do this, and you're doing it, and so you're screwing us. All that kind of, subject, object blaming and so forth, it just polarizes, it divides, it disconnects further. And our political environment is doing that very well without us doing it, and, on the environmental climate side. And so this movement to understand our relationship to this beautiful, extraordinary living planet is actually, at the very core of it, is regeneration, because regeneration is what life does. It's the default mode of life. Every living organism is regenerative in some way. All 37 trillion cells in your body right now are literally regenerating. You wouldn't be listening to me, and I wouldn't be talking if they weren't doing it for both of us. So we are inherently a regenerative organism. And the thing about regeneration is that it is innate. It's the natural proclivity of a human being. And when we care for our children, our family, our fathers, our uncles, our aunts, our community, our pets, our environment, our garden, wildlife, whatever. Caring is regeneration. We're caring for life. What are we doing? We're trying to prolong, or to, basically feed and nourish, life and so forth. That's regeneration. We do it every day, So it's not like the word isn't a radical concept, not radical, but like a word that's sort of made up and says, okay, sustainability. What does that mean? Oh, it means making sure that there's enough here for the next generation to have the same amount that you had, and okay, got that. What does that mean when I go to work? In other words, it was very conceptual. And regeneration may be conceptual to people hear the word the first time, or they probably haven't heard the first time, but it is actually, we know what that is. And why do we do that? Why do we act that way? Because kindness and generosity and love are inherent as human beings. It's not like a learned thing. It's inherent. It can be drummed out of us by war and trauma and things like that, I suppose. But even then, it's still there, no matter what happens to us and how much we suffer. And so what we're talking about is this is our heart, regeneration is at the very heart of everything. It's at the heart of us as well. So really, it's not so much as a way to tell people, which would be anathema to me, what to do. No, it's really about trying to engender what we know to do, which is to care for life on Earth and life around us.
It reminds me that really global warming is a symptom of a greater problem, and that problem of poverty, social justice. A lot of that stems from lack of empathy and sort of this old ideology of infinite growth, of the extractive way to exploit everything around you. And that has been the human tendency since we shifted from, hunter-gatherer type existence to more agricultural existence. And
Right.
when religion shifted from being in harmony with nature to trying to control it. So do you see in the religious and philosophical traditions, do you see a change to bring people back to that interconnectedness? Do you see that a lot in the modern conversations?
I mean, I think the core of every modern religion is kindness, basically. I don't question that for a bit. I think the onset of a global crisis of this has never happened. And nor has the earth been so well interconnected, in terms of media and news and video and TV and et cetera, as it is right now. So I think whether religions or not, I think that all institutions are sort of waking up, to something that institutionally they had never had to understand or deal with before. So it's new, And I mean, I grew up, in a church, and we were concerned with our community, people who were lacking something on Thanksgiving, who were poor. Some people had, something unfortunate happening to them. People who were, delinquents, I almost made it myself, we're juveniles, and, but it was connected, maybe to a larger religious system, okay, so all over the world or whatever. But the fact is, the focus was on that parish or that community, and so there wasn't a universal focus. There wasn't an earthly focus. There wasn't a biological focus in the sense of botany and nature and insects and marine environments and wetlands and woodlands. I mean, that didn't come up in the Sunday sermon. I mean. And so I think the religions around the world are starting to deal with that on a kind of a local community parish level, as a synagogue, as a temple. And it depends on leadership, depends on the pastor, the rector, whoever is, the leader of that particular religious establishment. Or it, people are saying we should do something, as an organization and so forth. So I would say it was a little slow coming to, because every religion uses the word creation, and they may have different ideas about when, what, and how, but it doesn't make any difference. It's still creation. and honoring that creation and not seeing the disconnect between their lifestyle or what they did, basically, Monday to Saturday, or, if it's Jewish, Sunday to Friday, I mean, the point being is they didn't really connect what they did, to make money, to support their family, to run their business, and what they did on Saturday or Seder or Sunday, I mean, it was a profound disconnect, And so that's one of those things that, the way you heal a system, whether it's an immune system, an ecosystem, a social system, is to connect more of it to itself. It's interesting. It's not like something outside. The immune system is healthy when it's really well connected. And we do things that make it disconnected, and then we're susceptible to viruses and diseases much more so than we would be otherwise. And that's same true with any system. So what we're talking about really, when we think about, well, what do we do about, global warming and so forth, we start to connect our systems more to themselves, which is, and we start with ourselves. And we start with ourselves only in the sense that we make a survey. We make, we look at what we do, what impacts we're having. We don't have to measure it down into tons. You can do footprints and things like that, but just to see, one's daily life. And, as I was writing Regeneration, I got rid of natural gas from my house. So there's no fossil fuels. I already had solar, but it's all, heat pumps, induction stove, and a range, So I just was so happy when I called my utility company and said, would you please take your gas meter off my property? but it's just one thing, and not everybody can afford to do that. So I understand that. So it's not saying I'm saying everybody should do that. We should make it affordable for everybody, but that's a different point as a policy issue. But what we eat is extremely important. 35% of the impact in terms of greenhouse gases comes from food and ag. It actually surmounts transportation as the number one source. Clothing is 10% of global emissions, and fast fashion is just an insult, really, to the earth, to people, to sheep, to cotton, to farmers, to me. I mean, it's just like, because you're here today, gone tomorrow. Shipped to Ghana in big bundles and containers to be, it's not to say that we shouldn't ship clothing to Ghana, but we shouldn't ship our castaways and things that don't last and don't hold up. So, I mean, you start going down, you look at those things, and you start to see connections, and you start to see the connection that 63% of the food that Americans eat is ultra processed food. And we have this extraordinary rate of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And now dementia is called type 3 diabetes. So they're seeing the relationship between blood sugar and obesity and dementia and so forth. But that all goes back to, all these food companies that, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Mondelez, all these companies are making ultra processed food, and advertising fast food, McDonald's, Wendy's, Arby's, all that sort of stuff. That stuff is killing us, killing our children, but it's also killing the environment. So when you change your diet, you're actually you're going both ways, is what I'm saying. When you start to buy locally, when you start to buy from your farmer's market, when you start to know your farmers, when the more you do that, the more local farmers are going to arise and show up and grow and prosper. The same, which restaurants do you eat in, and so forth. And of course, obviously, what do you cook and eat at home? So those are very, very profound climate decisions that you're making, 2-3 times a day. And it affects human health. And when you think that 20% of our GDP basically goes to our so-called health system, I don't think it is a health system. I call it a sick care system, because it doesn't deal with health. It deals with symptoms and disease, and treats it. 20% of our GDP, and we have the 35th worst health outcome in the developing world, 35th, and we spend, just trillions and trillions of dollars. And we say, whoa, people are miserable, suffering. The land is suffering. Our rivers are suffering from runoff and fertilizer. We're destroying our soil, making it into dirt, destroying our pollinator populations, and feeding people crap. Excuse me for using that word, but it is crap. And the body suffers, cumulatively. It's very resilient, but over time, you pay the price. And so that is really the most important thing, because then regeneration is like about self too, about making sure that we're healthy and in terms of not just what we eat. Obviously, it's, exercise. It's also about our minds, meditation, prayer, it's a whole system, but those lenses, that framework is what then we want to look out into the world and see, what is our neighborhood doing? What is our company doing? What is our businesses? What our business are doing? What are we doing as with the agency that we innately have? And agency occurs on all levels, but it always starts with an individual who wakes up and starts to make a difference in their life and starts to gather other people to make a difference on a larger scale.
The concept of agency, would you explain that? Would you expand on that?
Sure, because as you well know, I think most people feel like they've been told what they can do as individuals. Told, like use cold water in your washing machine. Okay, right. And in fact, the reason I started this is because in 2001, we didn't really have a list of solutions. If you cared about it, you didn't know what to do. The things you knew what to do is recycle, put cold water in the washing machine, drive less, drive less, it made sense. One of them from the Union of Concerned Scientists was put a power strip in your home entertainment center. And I thought that was rich. Does that mean you have to have a home entertainment center to put a power strip into to address climate? It's like, But I think that when people read these lists, they're sort of proverbial, kind of like, love your mother, pet your dog. For sure. But they also, unless you had an IQ lower than room temperature, they were inadequate to the task at hand. That it wasn't enough, and so what happened is we shifted to looking to government, obviously, national governments and international agreements between national governments, which is, the Conference of the Parties, COP. 26 starting in Kyoto, 27 years ago. And we've watched two things. One is we've watched the Conference of the Party basically come to agreement after Paris, but with nationally determined commitments, NDCs for each country, which is unenforceable. And only two countries have really met them since Paris, and they did it by default because they have so many forests. And that's it. And then we look at, Trump, Biden, like Trump was, basically, the kindest thing you can say is ignorant about climate. But actively his administration did things that went the opposite way. And then Biden had a lot of good advisors, but, basically frozen, can't get Build Back Better legislation with respect to climate passed in this political morass we call the USA. And so people look to big institutions, and see them sort of paralyzed and frozen by, corruption, by corporate interests, by politics, and knew what they were doing wasn't enough. So what was lost in that is agency. In other words, it's actually between those two is where we can make the biggest difference. And agency is, family. You're not just an individual, you're family, your neighborhood, your community, your schools, your classes, your churches, your synagogues, temples. You are cities, your towns, you are companies, you are corporations, your counties, your states, your provinces. All those are different levels of agency. And so that's where the action is. That's where we can make the biggest difference. That's where people come together, and sometimes they don't on a larger level, but that's where they naturally come together, because as human beings, we're so social. We'd like to learn together and do things together. We'd like to solve problems together, actually. And so what we try to talk about in Regeneration is really about, and it's called Nexus. It's in the website. I always say the most important part of the book is the website. So, if you want to bypass, the book is fine. Regeneration.org is a website. But in Nexus, it's not completed yet, but it's the largest listing of climate solutions in the world. But the listing, who cares? It's how to get them done. In other words, it's the know-how, and it has many, many links to people, different levels of agency that are getting it done. In other words, and this is this city, this town, this church, this classroom, this college, this community, all the different levels of agency. And then it points to them and saying, well, they did this and they do this and they do this and they've done this, and you can get in touch with them. And these are things you can do as individual as well. Okay. So when you go to a Nexus, and there's 100 and some odd different solutions and challenges, what you can do is rather than say, God, I've got to do this and this if I don't do this. No. Just take that away. That's burden, guilt. What you want to discover and find is something that really lights you up. Right? You love it. It's what you want to do. It could be on the social justice side. It can be on help and ameliorating suffering and hunger and lack of education, or whatever it is. It can start there. It can go all the way to the insect extinction, which is, you love butterflies, moths, you love bees, you love, you don't love mosquitoes necessarily, but you love the fact that, the insect world is going extinct, and it's going extinct very, very fast. And you learn, if you read Regeneration, and that it's plummeting, actually. It's just, and you think, well, okay, whatever. It's kind of nice without so many insects. No, it's not. What you learn is that if we lose our insects, and there's 1.4 billion insects for every human being on the planet, so there's a lot of them, but there's 40 to 70 to even 80% losses in the last 3 to 4 decades. And everybody can tell there's not as many moths around the lights at night, and the windshield effect, where you can drive and there isn't all that insect protein splattered on the windshield at night. And everybody knows it, has sensed it, sees it. But once you get down to, a 90+%, even 80 to 90%, reduction in insect life, then it collapses. And when it collapses, and this is what's so extraordinary about insects, is that they're the bottom of the food web. We think of the trophic cascade, the top of the food web, the wolves in Yellowstone, things like that, without which, the whole trophic cascade changes. Well, the bottom is more important. And that goes, everything goes. We lose every bird, mammal, animal within a year. A year. We lose every farm within a year or two. We don't lose the fungi because so many things are dying. It grows and then it dies. Within 3 years, and this is E.O. Wilson, this is not me, this is the world's premier entomologist who died recently. We go back to 1 billion years ago, the planet. In 3 years, we go back 1 billion years, and the planet is basically bacteria and algae. All forests are gone. Fish are gone. We just have no, and what's so beautiful about that, that sounds horrible, and it is, but is that thing that you said earlier about interconnection. We don't understand how exquisitely interconnected we are as living beings with insects, dragonflies, you think, wow, they live, for 3-4 weeks in their 5-year lifespan airborne. There was 3-4 weeks they're in the air and they're flying around with those, iridescent wings that look like, ball gowns, showing off to the females, and they can go 35 miles an hour. They have eyes that have 24,000 corneas. You and I have two, and they have 24,000 corneas, and they can see up, down, sideways. They can see behind and in front at all times. What's that about? What does it mean to be a dragonfly, to see everything around you 360? But they can, and but they live 2 to 5 years underwater as nymphs, and so forth, and they just come up that those few weeks to breathe. They're collapsing and so forth. And it's not that we will just miss dragonflies for their beauty and all that sort of stuff. We'll miss them on every level. And so to get people to understand, so maybe your thing is dragonflies, so that's what I'm saying, or maybe you just think are insects, or you love the butterfly population, which is crashing, by the way. We only have 1% of the monarch butterflies in California now, compared to what we had 50 years ago. 1%. Okay. And tourists used to come to watch the migration, nothing to watch anymore. And so what you find in Nexus is all these areas that of concern, of solutions that are challenges and so forth, but you find the one that just, makes sense to you, that you love, or something about, or it's something you want to know something about. You've always been curious, you got a job as an accountant, but you actually, really love, fly fishing or fishing, or so, okay, there's a good thing. Mayflies, fishing, insects, rivers. So there you are, beavers, now you're in a whole nother, ecosystem, understanding, and what you can do, and you realize, gosh, if I help with beavers, I'm helping with the mayflies, the insect, and the fly fishing, and so forth. So that's what's possible. And I think if we were all celebrating life instead of acting out of fear that we're going to lose our life, we would get a lot more done, and we become together much more easily than if our actions around climate are based on tackling, combating, and fighting, and winning what, because and we talk about mitigating. That's a good word. I love that word too. Could you imagine? So we got to mitigate. It's like, who wakes up in the morning and saying, I just can't wait to mitigate today? It's like, again, the language is like so. And it's got to be something where you wake up and go, oh, today I'm going to fine, or, whatever. That is the climate movement we need.
When I was reading your book, it just over and over and over, was reminded of all the different ways that that's true. In studying religion and philosophy of the various traditions around the world, I see the repeating theme of all life is connected, all life is one. But reading your book really shows the science of it. And there's an overwhelming amount of that science. So it's really inspiring that science is sort of catching up to that.
Well, I think not every religion, there's some exceptions, I won't name them, but almost all the major religions are teaching non-dual thinking. And the world, as soon as we are born and go to, school, we're taught we're taught duality. Mm-hmm. It's how we learn.
Right.
I would say the exception to that is indigenous cultures, where it isn't even in the language. In other words, it's hard to in their own native language to speak in dualistic terms, and that's true in other languages too that are not, we don't consider indigenous to a certain extent, but we are just baked, steeped, and soaked in duality. And our religious affiliations are, I think the attraction of religion for one is to actually open that back up, that open up that sense of connectedness, and interconnectedness, and relatedness. And relatedness is love. If when you feel related to something, it's different than feeling, distant or from it, and or aversion, And so, yes, that's the teaching. And that's, the way I look at it, Chris, is we're being homeschooled right now by the earth. and mom's homeschooling us. And so all the things we're seeing, in terms of floods and, migration, in terms of droughts, in terms of, cyclonic disturbances of unknown proportion, the effect heating is having on marine environments, on forests, on insects too, by the way, etc. I mean, these things that happen, like the Direxo in Iowa, that wiped out crops, I mean, who has cyclones in Iowa? We do now. I mean, land-based cyclones. I mean, these things are just basically feedback from the earth. It's feedback. And any system that ignores feedback perishes. If you get a fever, that's a gift. It's not a curse. It is a blessing for your body saying, excuse me, something's going on. And I'm doing the best I can, as a body, to deal with it, but, check it out. It's like, and that's what the earth is doing to us. And so if we see global warming as, again, as like a curse or, a bad thing negatively, we're missing the gift. The gift is that it's an offering. It is a call. It is a tell. It is our ally. It is saying, I don't speak English. I'm just the earth. But what I'm saying is we got to come together, and it's so obvious, and the things that divide us are almost irrelevant, if not totally irrelevant to the things that unite us and connect us. And we're so focused on what divides us right now. And so as long as we do that, the feedback is going to increase. That is to say, weather is going to get more severe and the impacts of extreme weather are going to get more disruptive to the way we do things, what we expect, what we want, food, water, health, all those things are going to be impacted. And so it's an interesting, sort of dynamic now and you said something earlier too, which I really appreciate, that for a long time, climate has been a conceptual thing. It's a concept, like science. Oh, okay. And you could take science at face value and say, yeah, I got it. Thanks. But it was still a concept. You went to work, you did your thing, you had your home, you had your friends, you had your family, you went around, you went vacations. You didn't experience it. You read about it maybe. And what's happened, especially in the last 2 years, we are in California where, now fire is extraordinary. It's always been a fire ecology state, created by fire, but the fires now are very different. And so what's happening, and you're seeing it move from the conceptual to the experiential. So what we're seeing right now is a tremendous growth in the interest in the application and coming together. We are seeing that. There's no question about it. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And I don't predict it. I'm just going to make a connection, which is we know that the extreme weather and the causes of it are not a linear system, that it's going to get more disruptive and not just in a ladder stair step. It's going to sometimes shock us. And that's kind of baked in, it's really baked in because of the amount of emissions that are being generated now and growing. But at the same time, the thing that's going to change people is weather. And that's when you drop whatever you were thinking or not caring about, and you put that aside and go, wow, this is my family, my community, my home, my business, my farm, my whatever. And you think, I got to do something.
That's a reactionary type approach. And what regeneration suggests is we need a proactive approach. With modern politics and modern business, and the people who and the leaders who are making so much money on the current system, they're not motivated to change. Do you see a shift in their mindset? The people who are in a position to take the actions that have significant impact.
I do. Something has really shifted in the last 2-3 years. In the last 2 years, before, because I've worked with corporations for a long time, and sustainability was like a department, and you did this and this and that to get your social license renewed, every couple of years, because you didn't want to be mau-maued by your customers or youth. But we have a business to run. So you guys down there, came from Evergreen College or this or, Dartmouth, and you go run that department and make sure we get it right. And in the meantime, we're going to go run our company. And what I see now is CEOs that you can see it in their eyes. Actually, they get it. It's like, oh my gosh, kind of getting it. Like, whoa. And they get it because they have children or grandchildren, and they certainly have brothers and sisters, have, mates, partners, they have, and they now see that this is very personal, to them, and then therefore, personal to everybody else, of course. And so what I'm seeing now is CEOs who then find themselves, okay, because of their abilities and and intelligence and brilliance and many things, find themselves sitting on top of a major corporation, and and what do I do? And they can see that the corporation is at fault in the sense of the impact it's having. And do you just go off and, buy a farm in Idaho, or do you stay there? And what I'm seeing is they're going to stay right there, and they get it. And two of them, which shock people, really surprise people, is the CEO of Walmart. And go look at his speech he gave a year and a half ago, where he said today, I commit Walmart to being a regenerative company. And he talks about what that means. And that's Doug McMillon. You can go Doug McMillon, Google, Regeneration speech, and see it live. Watch him. It's the real deal. It's Doug. And the Walton family that owns, the majority shares in the thing is all behind that. I mean, they're all behind it. It's not like there's, And then Nestle, which is, the biggest food company in the world, is committed to transforming the 1 million farms that are their supply chain to regenerative agriculture. So, and that's Mark Schneider. And so, but it's in other areas as well, and I mean, I've seen it and talked to them. And so, there's something has shifted, which is, they can't just shut the business down. I mean, because that wouldn't help. And so how you make this, far-flung, enterprise, both of them are the two biggest supply chains in the world. How do you transform them into something that actually comports to creating more life instead of less, right? And as I say, the first sentence of regeneration is putting life at the center of every act and decision. It's binary. This is take life or engender, make life, or create life or support life. And it's a question you can answer every day easily. And then it doesn't mean it's always going to be yes, not at all. But then you understand when it's like, okay. Then you have a way of understanding what you're doing that may be modified, maybe changed, maybe this is going to cause that. And they're doing it on a level of extraordinary level of corporate endeavor. So it's actually kind of interesting what's going on. There are reasons to hope, hope is not a really big word in my lexicon. I think hope is really the mask of fear. And so I think we need to be fearless, not hopeful. Fearlessness is more important right now because, but I do think there are reasons to, look at what's going on right now and see, even in renewable energy. I mean, the rate of growth in renewable energy is extraordinary. And, Chris, when we did the book, we looked at the International Energy Agency and the World Bank and, to see the projections, of what solar and wind would be going forward. Would we get to net zero emissions, in terms of substituting renewable energy and electricity for coal, gas, and oil? And we looked at their numbers and they were kind of, but we were very heartened by their numbers because they had been wrong every year for 20 years. They never got it right, even close. And they underestimated the rate at which costs went down and the rate which solar and wind were being implemented. So what we did is we took that actually 25-year growth curve, which is a very, very smooth, sort of moving to sort of an asymptote. And we just said, well, we'll just keep going, see where it goes, and what we see is net zero in 2040, not 2050. And because we being whoever, the world has vastly underestimated the rate at which human beings innovate and change. And so we take the present and project it forward, and because we can't project the future backwards because we don't know what the future is in that sense. And there's other projections now. Saul Griffith, who wrote the book Electrify, says 2037, if he includes nuclear. But the point being is that I think we can do this a lot faster. And what we know is that the 6th assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out, it's still coming out. But one of the things that came out was that it was widely taught and assumed that if we hit net zero emissions in terms of greenhouse gases, that the world would continue to warm and get warmer for decades. In other words, it was a lock-in. And it didn't give us a big incentive to go to net zero in a way. It's like, well, we get there, but, it just keeps, basically doing that. And what they know now is that their models are wrong. It's science. It's never right. It's always moving closer to being right. What we know now is that within 3 to 5 years of emissions peaking, warming stops. In other words, there's no more warming. And if we implement many of the solutions that are in regeneration, that bring carbon back home, regenerative agriculture, kelp farms, the restoration of wetlands, the replanting of mangroves, the tidal salt marshes, seagrasses, obviously reforestation in a major way and so forth, and other, that is a drawdown. That draws carbon back down. So, we could have cooling begin in 2043, 2045, the beginning of cooling. We know how to do that. We have everything, everything we have at hand, the knowledge, the technology, and so forth. There are supply concerns for sure, but we do know how to do that. And so that's the good news, as opposed to, gee, how do you get there from here? You can't, yes, you can.
I did have a question about hope. Really, I guess I should phrase it as like on a scale of from fear, despair to confidence that we're going to handle this. Where do you fall on that scale?
I'm not interested in the scale.
Okay. Okay.
Because I'll be wrong. Not that I have a big thing about being right. I don't. This is what I think, which is that the organizations on all levels of agency that we mentioned previously are active and all over the world and becoming more and more active. They're generating more and more activity. Okay. And sometimes, occasionally, people at an NGO or something will come to me and say, we're not making the progress we need, and I'll say yes and no. True, if you look at the numbers, but what you're doing is rehearsing the future. And as weather changes, people change. And basically, when you're in trouble, what do? If your body's in trouble, what do? You turn to somebody who knows more about it than you do. We all do. Whether it's our car, body, something in the house. I mean, it doesn't matter, our taxes or this or that. We turn to somebody who knows more, who studied it up, and the same thing holds true with climate activity, that is activities that really do address global warming. It's happening. People are doing it. They're having fun. They are excited, and we don't know them. We don't see them. We don't, maybe unaware of them, but I'll tell you, as soon as you wake up, and you will, I guarantee it, then you go to people who have gone before you and want to share and want to teach and look for involvement and so forth. So that's out there, it's the seed of the future. And it's going to be a really, really rough ride for sure. It already is, in my opinion. And that kind of disruption can also cause people to, have the worst behavior too, you see that as well. So, it depends which way you look at it, it's Dickensian, the best and worst of times at the same time,
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that does lead into the sort of the way that people respond does, completely depend on their background, their education, their status, where they are. And so you have some people who respond with fear. You have some, we saw it very clearly when COVID pandemic started, people rushed to the grocery store and started hoarding supplies. And so that to me shows, well, that worries me, what will happen when we do have shifting weather and when weather becomes worse. Do we have the business leaders, some are changing, some are making promises, but others are going the opposite way. Do you see the big fossil fuel companies? How do you see their response to this?
Well, I mean, if you have a hammer, everything in the world looks, if you're a hammer, everything in the world looks like a nail, so if you're a fossil fuel company, you see the world that way. And so it's innate. I think that, I don't think they're going to change too, and we need fossil fuels right now. Let's be honest, when, the Byrne was running for president from Vermont, he was just excoriating fossil fuel companies, but he was also flying around in a private to different campaign stops, that's duality again, which is, look at, I was, even when when Hillary Clinton was running for president and she talked about the deplorables, and that was I probably lost the election, that word. But even if she had not used the word, she should have gone to West Virginia. She should have gone to the coal mining areas, in Wyoming, Kentucky, Ohio, and so Pennsylvania. She should have gone there and said, we owe you so much. You have done so much for this world. You powered this country. You powered us through 2 world wars. You powered us into the greatest economy the world has ever seen, and so forth. You paid a high price in terms of human health, environmental health, and so forth. And if I'm elected president, boy, my job is to take care. That's job number 1, to take care of you and your children, your children's children, so that you really feel the gratitude of this country to what you've done. Hello, that's true, you know? And people want to hear that, they don't want to be seen as, bad people. They're not. None, and so I'm not talking about, I'm talking about individuals, it doesn't mean the owners of these companies were good people and did things that were like, oh, come on. But I'm talking about the individuals, and the voters, and the citizens. And I feel the same now, which is that we should be coming together in gratitude as opposed to, rectitude, we really need to change the conversation. The conversation is toxic. And if it wasn't for global warming, if it didn't exist at all, then, well, okay, let's work it out. But we have this impending, growing level of disruption that is, I think, going to shock people, really. And you're concerned about what do people do when you don't have enough food? Good question. Do people hoard? They will, by the way. We know that. It's what people do. But what does the community do? Does it all look to each other and say, if we work together, we thrive together. If we don't, and so that's what I'm saying about being homeschooled, about who to be and what's going to work and what's not going to work. And every time we make choices, and so that's what's so beautiful about global warming and this crisis that confronts us, is that it is a profound teaching. It really is, and that teaching is a blessing.
That brings us right back to shifting the worldview from what can I get for me to we're all in this together and we need to take care of each other. That's such a powerful message, and it really does show throughout your book. So I'm really grateful for that. We don't have a lot of time left, but I would like to ask what your thoughts are on the people who don't want to change, who don't worry about it, and specifically think that, well, science will figure something out. We'll sort it with some sort of Deus ex machina. So we'll have some geoengineering feat that just fixes it so we can keep on with business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, they're the subtle deniers, I mean, they're not deniers. What they are is thinking exactly as you described, and so forth, that once more, we can outwit, outfox, outcompete nature. And I have no problem with that. I mean, you never know. They may have a breakthrough. They may discover something. There may be some new science, I'm all for science and technology as well, by the way. And I work for 14 years, work with a fusion company in Irvine. It's very quiet, but they're the closest to fusion of any company or institution in the world. And I know the people there. I know the work. I've met some of the workers. I know the CEO, the founder, co-founder, and it's just a beautiful organization. I think they're going to produce net energy in 2025. And fusion is making starlight on Earth, which is kind of sweet when you think about it. And but they're doing it aneutronically with no safe. Using boron as a fuel you can get at the grocery store. They're not using tritium. They're really thinking about it in a very holistic way. And what's come up with the Ukraine-Russian war, of course, is that a lot of countries realize that their dependency on energy was not a wise thing, especially coming from an autocracy. And most of the oil comes from autocracy: Venezuela, Brazil, Russia, Saudi Arabia, And so the idea of, both renewable and fusion type energy, that will make countries energy independent is driving now growth in that industry and investment and so forth. So, I'm for technology, but I'm not for what you described, though, which is saying somehow technology will solve it. Because we could have renewable energy 100% today, and we're still going to go right over the cliff because we're destroying life on Earth. Whether it's our insects, whether it's our oceans, whether it's our forests, whether it's our farmlands, it's our grasslands, whether it's biodiversity, whether that's not being, and some of it's caused by fossil fuels, but that's caused by us. You can have a chainsaw in the Amazon that's run on renewable energy with lithium-ion batteries, and it's still going to deforest the Amazon. So we have to, see this in a bigger way, as opposed to a fix.
Do you have any advice for people? This can be our last question. Do you have any advice for people on how to shift the conversation toward regeneration? How to reframe the conversation, because it has to be a conscious decision, a conscious reframing of how we perceive the world.
Yeah. One way you reframe it is to take climate out of the picture. In other words, you don't have to talk about it. So if people have adversity or averse, about science and that, and then they don't understand it, they don't like it or whatever, it's like, take it, it doesn't matter. You can be specific as to what you care about, what you do. If you care about children who don't get enough food, who's to say you're off your rocker? No one's going to say that. Everybody, you're doing a good thing. And so if you're looking at health and well-being, that's a good thing. If you're looking at the health and well-being of the community around you, that's people. Yeah. If you're looking at the purity of the water, itself, for drinking, so that everybody can drink water from the tap, without, reverse osmosis filter, that's a good thing. If you're in a community and saying, we're losing our fish, and you're talking to fisher folk and hunters, they're interested. If you're talking about farmers, about, creating a healthy or farming environment for their family and animals, but also one that costs, that saves them money and increases their income, they're interested. None of these things you have to talk about climate at all. And yet they have a profound impact on climate. And so it's almost like, get specific, get local, get real, but don't talk about an overarching thing, you're not doing anything about global warming, that's not a good Thanksgiving Day conversation, It's like, and this is what Barbara and I are doing, this is what John and I are doing, we're doing this, we got involved with this, and we're having so much fun, or we're doing this and we're enjoying it, and this is the results, and so forth. And that's my way of thinking about it, which is, don't preach, never, just practice.
Be the change we wish to see in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. In Buddhism, they talk about practice, and you do have to practice this every day. If you don't, you kind of, your mind goes on. But you have a practice that is really about loving and nurturing the world, it feeds you in a way. It just feeds you. You get nourished by it. You get regenerated by it, so, and that's what regeneration teaches you,
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate having you here. The work that you're doing is so important, and we're really inspired by everything that you've shared today. Paul's book, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, is an amazing book. I highly recommend it. It's filled with content that is so much more content than you think. There's chapters on everything, things that I never would have thought about. across the entire spectrum of life on Earth.
Right.
So it's a really inspiring book. Thank you so much, Paul. Please look up Paul's website, paulhawken.com, where he's got a lot of information about a lot of the projects he's done, and visit regeneration.org. We'll put a link for it in the description of our video. Thank you so much for your time, Paul. We really appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you, Chris. It was a joy and pleasure to be in conversation with you. I probably spoke too much, but I loved your questions and I love the insight you shared and offered in your questions. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.